It's the Mike Francesa podcast on the Bet Rivers Network.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Mike Francesa podcast. Remember, the Mike Francesa podcast is exclusive on the Bet Rivers Network. And for all of your wagering needs, it's Bet Rivers in New York and New Jersey and Play Sugar House in Connecticut. Now, obviously, although the football teams are doing very well, the Jets suffered, obviously, some serious injuries, and the Wonder Hall is crippling because he was on his way to being something very special. I think he still will be. I don't think this is, they do an amazing work with ACLs now, incredible work with ACLs, but it still finishes his rookie season, and he was on his way to a very, very special rookie season. He's got a world of talent. He was a terrific pick, and that's a very sad note. But right now the story is the Yankees off what was a devastating four-game sweep, and one that rocks the very foundation of who they are. I can tell you this. All the talk has clearly been and expected, as you would expect it to be, and will be going forward, about what the future holds. And there are four people that it centers around. Obviously, it centers around the incumbents, Cashman and Boone. It also centers around, for some reason, two Yankee greats, Jeter and Mattingly. I do not expect to see Jeter and Mattingly with big positions with the Yankees. I would be very surprised if that happens, number one. Number two, in talking to people, and I think it is time to make a wholesale change. Wholesale, which means clean house. And that means management too. But from what I am told from people that I trust, Boone could be, shaky. But they feel Cashman is not shaky in the least, and that he's going nowhere, that he is held in that high of esteem with the ownership, and that he is going nowhere. That's what I've heard in, the small amount of time since it unfolded, and I trust where I hear it. So let's do some emails. And remember, you can send your emails to mikefrancesapodcast@gmail.com. I made some statements last night. I'll reiterate them as we go through, and we'll see what's on your mind. Jared starts us off. Do you think the Yankees, if they had Brett Gardner this year, it would have helped them win the ALCS? I think they were missing his glove in the outfield and his veteran leadership. That is giving him, at this stage of his career, way too much impact. Could they have used him? Absolutely. Hicks was who I've never been a fan of, was just an utter disappointment. Cabrera didn't hit at all, and he did not play left field well. That was asking him a lot, to be honest with you. And he could have been a positive, as surely would have been Benintendi. But I don't think that was all we're talking about here. This was such a one-sided romp. Because a couple of the games are close, people are saying, oh, it really wasn't that big a gap. No, hey, this is baseball. What do you think? You're going to beat everybody by, 10 runs? It doesn't work that way. The Astros did whatever they wanted to. If they needed to come from behind, they came from behind, as they did last night on two different occasions. If they needed a big hit, they got it. If they needed the long ball, they got it. If they needed the big out, they got it. They did everything right. And they did it in an overpowering style in 4 straight games. It was, that's as decided a romp as you can get. But I think that would have been giving Brett too much impact at this stage of his career. Hershey Valley Stream, for years, I have thought that the Yankees needed to change from Cashman, but knew there was no shot they would let him go after this utter disgrace. Is there any shot that he finally makes the move? Meaning how? I don't think so. I think they should change it. It's not that Cash hasn't had a career. He has. He's had a wonderful career. But I think it's time for a change. From what I am told, that is not going to happen. The people I trust who I talk to say he is just held in too good a stead with the team and with ownership is not going to happen. So they do not expect it to happen at all. So that dismisses the third email, which is from Vincent, would you consider Theo Epstein? I might, but the Yankees wouldn't. Nor would they ever consider his price tag. Fred in East Haven, one of the biggest differences that I noticed between the late 90s teams versus this one is that they picked each other up and had a lot of non-all-star players who made big plays and got big hits in big spots. This team had to rely on Aaron Judge, who was very disappointing in the postseason, and nobody picked him up. You are exactly right. This team was utter reliant on Judge, incredibly reliant on Judge. The lineup had automatic outs sprinkled throughout it, and when Judge did not hit, it really impacted this team dramatically, and Judge had a very, very poor postseason. Off a dynamic season, he had an extremely, extremely poor postseason. And he hasn't had great postseasons. We know that. Okay? So, is that a big issue? It can become one. It's still not a major sampling, but it can become one. In this day and age where you play so many postseason games in a year, your performance is much greater and deserves far more scrutiny than it did back in the day where you played a World Series and maybe you had 10 or 15 at-bats in a World Series, or 20 on a big World Series, or 30 on a massive at-bat World Series. It was not the same. Now you can wind up playing an incredible number of games in the postseason. As many players from a different era played in their whole careers. So that's why the scrutiny that is placed on the postseason performance is that much greater. The teams of the great Yankee teams, the Tory Yankees, were reliant on no one. In terms of their everyday players, their biggest star was Jeter, and many times when people analyzed the lineup, he was considered the maybe third or fourth best offensive player at times, despite the fact he was always very clutch. He was the leader, he played a pivotal position, and he was extremely clutch. But he never carried the team. That wasn't his way. He set the table more than carried the team. That was his way. That's what made him a very unique player. But he led, and what he did, and Bernie Williams did too, was they played at as high a level, if not a higher level, in the postseason than they did in the regular season. Those players are treated very, very well. Eli Manning's another one of those, who his postseason performances are raised. He's at his best when the game's the biggest. Jeter was at his best when the game was biggest. Bernie was at his best when the game was biggest. They got big performances out of Tino Martinez, out of Scott Brocious, go down the line, and many other role players, and guys who were everyday players but not superstars. That team would beat you, just like I mentioned last night. The classic comeback in 2003 against Pedro Martinez from 5-2 down in the eighth. You're in the eighth inning against one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history. In the seventh and deciding game. And are you out of it if you don't get a walk, a bloop, and a blast? No. It starts off with a line drive double that is a ball that Trot Nixon probably should have caught off the bat of Derek Jeter. Bernie Williams then hits a line drive, base hit to center field, a rope that scores Jeter, makes it 5-3, and moves the train. Matsui comes up and hits a ball inside the first base bag, down the right field line, and now the Yankees have it set up at second and third. Martinez stays in the game. Posada dumps a single into center field of Texas League, and now it's 5-5. Add in the fact that Mussina came out of the bullpen and pitched brilliantly in that game. Mariano Rivera pitched 3 innings in that game. And it finally ended on a walk-off home run, as we all know. But in that 8th inning of that classic game, the Yankees did it with a double, a single, a double, a single. They didn't do it with a home run. They didn't do it with a walk, a hit batter, and then a home run. They didn't do it with a bloop and a walk and a blast. Rallies now for the Yankees have a home run involved, or they don't have a rally. That wasn't the case with that team in the 90s. And the players lifted themselves, and they had many, many clutch performers, from Derek Jeter to Bernie Williams to Paul O'Neill to Posada to Matsui, all the way down. And Matsui later on, of course, but go earlier, O'Neill, Brocious, Tino Martinez, Chuck Knobloch. Go to the great inning against San Diego. Knobloch, 3-run homer. Tino, after he takes a pitch where Langston thought he had him struck out, grand slammer. The bottom line is, it could be anybody in that lineup. But for the most part, it was, and if you look at the guys who have all the postseason numbers, it's Jeter, it's Bernie, time after time after time. And they were guys who played as all-stars in the regular season, not superstars. Jeter was a superstar because of the all-around nature of his leadership, his persona, and everything else. But these guys did not carry teams. They were not Aaron Judges. They were not Mickey Mantles. They were not Babe Ruths or Barry Bonds or Joe DiMaggio's. And the Yankees now have never had the kind of balance that they had with that team. Never. And one of the biggest things that Houston has done, and Houston is a team that has a lot of new age thinking, and remember how to replace its brain trust because of the scandal. But they are very forward-thinking. But what they have done very well is they have allowed players to leave or be without players. So they lose Correa. They lose Brantley to injury. They lose Springer. They let players leave, and they replace them. Here's an Alvarez. Here's a Tucker. Here's a Pena. These guys are terrific players. Where are the Yankee players that they have replaced all these players with as a guy leaves? Dustin asks, do you see any way the Yankees are a World Series contender next year if Judge is not on the team? How could they possibly get enough guys in the lineup to compete with Houston if Judge is gone? Well, if you're going to base it just on guys who are free agents, if they lost Judge, there's a hole there that they can't replace because of what he did this year. But we have all learned that when you have that kind of money to spend and you can spend it in a certain way, then you can build a lineup. So it's not like they can't compensate if they lose them. They can compensate if they make smart moves. Mike from Washington Township emails, in my opinion, the seeds of the 2004 Yankee loss to the Red Sox in the ALCS can be traced to the winter before, when Steinbrenner, who for whatever reason was never a big Andy Pettitte fan, made a lukewarm attempt to re-sign him as he wound up signing with the Astros. With Pettitte, the Yankees wouldn't have lost. Do you agree? Yes. What the Yankees did was run out of starting pitching. When the Red Sox came from behind against Mariano in the ninth inning of Game 4, and then beat the bullpen again from 5-3 behind in Game 5. When Game 6, when the scene shifted and they put Schilling and his bloody sock on the mound, the Yankees had no answer. They had no pitchers they could trust. They had no starting pitching left. They were completely void of starting pitching for the last 2 games. And it showed. If they had had Andy Pettitte, it never would have happened. I totally agree with that. Victor, is there any comparison between the Big Red Machine that beat the Yankees in 76 and did it in 4-game street and this current Astros team? That's a very interesting question. I don't think there's any direct comparisons. The Big Red Machine was one of the great teams of all time. It was a team that had okay starting pitching, a great bullpen, and a legendary lineup bolstered by great defense and superstar players. You had Pete Rose, Joe Morgan, Johnny Bench, Tony Perez. You also had Concepcion. You had Griffey Jr., Dan Dreesen. You had Geronimo in center field. You had wonderful players, role players, superstar players, an incredible lineup, great defense, and great relief pitching. And the Yankees, when they played him in 76, had no power. They had very weak throwing arms in the outfield, what the Yankees were embarrassed by. And the Reds really took advantage of the Yankees in that regard. And the lack of power was so pronounced it led to the whole Reggie Jackson thing. They were a team that wasn't a home run hitting team. And in that series, they were overwhelmed, completely overwhelmed. And, Munson had a great series. But Game 4, Johnny Bench, and I was there. I went to Games 3 and 4 of that series. Very cold, Yankee Stadium, freezing, like 34 degrees at game time. I sat upstairs, first base, top level, first base, about 8 rows from the rail, about right on first base in the upper deck. And went with my late brother, Marty, to the games. First World Series game I had ever been to. And the Yankees they just were overmatched. Case closed. The Reds were just better. Always wanted to play the Reds again. Yankees, which became a great, crusty team the next year. And were a great team in 77 and 78 and could play, those 77 and 78 teams could play with anybody and would back down from nobody. I always wanted the Yanks to play the Reds again. They didn't. They played the Dodgers both those years, beat the Dodgers both those years, and then lost to the Dodgers in 81. But always wanted to play those Big Red Machine again, and they didn't get a chance. Mark emails, Mike, you have made a lot about athletes performing in the regular season versus performing in the postseason. That being said, I don't see a lot of people taking Aaron Judge to task for coming up small in the series against Houston and losing a third ALCS to them. He's a career 220 postseason hitter, and I think it's time that he is taken to task. Okay. He had a great season. He has not been a great postseason performer. He has not lifted his game in the postseason or done anything like he's done in the regular season in the postseason, where the pitching is better. And clearly, both Cleveland and Houston went after Judge. They attacked him. And he didn't handle that well. He had been very used to being pitched around. And they attacked him. They attacked him in the strike zone. They didn't have any fear of him, and it worked out well. He hit a couple of home runs. He hit a couple of balls that could have been home runs that fell just short. But you know what? That's October baseball. Some days the atmosphere and the wind blowing in is not going to provide the same thing it does in August and in July. Greg emails, which baby bomber would you say has been the biggest disappointment of the ones that came up? Sanchez, Torres, Andrew Harbird. I would say that of that group, Sanchez, because so much was expected early. And when he got started, everyone thought that he was going to be just an amazing power-hitting catcher for a very long time. And obviously it didn't happen. Neil emails, last night you said something felt different about this Yankee season ending. Was the feeling different the entire season or just in the playoffs? The feeling was very different in the middle of the season. The Yankees got off to a crazy start. They won a lot of games. Judge did some amazing things to win games they probably shouldn't have won. They came from behind and won a lot of games. They had an incredible record. They were being compared to the best teams in history, which I thought was ridiculous. Because when I looked at the team, I said, are we sure that this bullpen, Holmes and King, are going to do this all year? I haven't trusted Chapman in years. I've told you for years I thought he was done. So to me, the Yankees still didn't go into the season with the bona fide kind of closer they've had in the past when they were good. And, of course, the years where they had the greatest closer of all time. This team went in there with very, very weak bullpen. The King injury, all the injuries to the guys who were out, obviously, in the bullpen, and then not having Holmes be Holmes. Like last night, I thought Peralta did a yeoman's work. I thought Loizaga did a great job. And it still wasn't enough because the defense broke down in the big spot. And the Yankees showed you just how weak they were and unsettled they were. And you know what? Leadoff had something to do with not having LeMahieu there. The problems they had defensively in left field where the ball kept dropping in, all right, you can point to Benintendi not being there, but other teams have injuries too. But here's the thing. The Yankees couldn't even settle on who they wanted to play shortstop. They couldn't settle on who to lead off. They should have been leading off Beta once they gave him the first game there. And I even said that. I said a couple of days ago, I said, Beta's got to be the leadoff guy. He's getting on base. He's hitting the ball well. You want to put some people in front of Judge. That's what you're looking for. And Beta had a very good series. We know that. He had a very good postseason. He's a nice player. I don't think he's a great player by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a nice player. He had a very good postseason. Rizzo had a very good postseason. He's a wonderful player. He's a leader on the team. From my understanding, he is a very big leader on the team. Extremely big leader. And he's a great defender. And he comes up with big hits and plays smart. And does it the right way. So they need guys like Rizzo. But when you don't even settle your shortstop position, that's when you get mistakes like you got last night on the Pena ball. And if you're as good as the Astros, you take advantage of every mistake anybody gives you. If somebody gives you an extra out, you make them pay. And that absolutely happened last night. And the Yankees couldn't get the Astros out when they needed to. They couldn't get Bregman out when they needed to. Last night they couldn't get Alvarez out when they needed to. And they couldn't get a big hit off the back of that pen. And let's be honest, McCullers had nothing last night, and they still got 5 innings out of him where he kept his team in the ball game. He got off to a terrible start with a couple of bloops and the hit batter and everything else. And he settled down enough to get 5 innings out of that game where he really had nothing. I mean, you just saw it. Everything they did worked. And you saw how glaring the Yankee weaknesses was. You go in a series and you don't have anybody settled at the leadoff spot. You don't have anybody settled in the closer role, and you don't have anybody settled at shortstop. How are you supposed to win? But I saw when this team had that 50-game stretch that was like Stump Merrill-like. That was, was the worst 50-game stretch the Yankees have had since the days of Stump Merrill. It stuck with me that this team never regained its traction. It played okay for a couple of weeks in September and kept the lead, didn't completely collapse, okay? But it never, and it was carried inordinately by a guy who had a special season in Judge. And I just did not think this team was a serious contender. And I find it a team that has so many prevailing weaknesses. And I'll tell you, I don't trust a lot of their big players. I don't trust Stanton. I don't trust Cole. And Cole pitched well in the postseason this year. And he should have got a chance to pitch out of that bases-loaded jam in the 6th inning. To bring Trevino in there for Cole is almost a slap in the face. If you brought Loaiza again, you could almost rationalize it, but still wrong. Bring anybody but Loaiza again is crazy. He's got the best stuff out there. And I thought Peralta was game. I thought he was game when he came in. He tried very, very hard against a very, very tough lineup. A lineup that takes advantage of situations. Perfect example. Yankees are up. Cortez walks the first 2 batters. And now Pena is ahead of him 3-1, and Pena says, you know what? It's going to have to be a perfect pitch, but I'm not going to let him just drop a batting practice pitch in terms of quality into the strike zone for strike 2. And when Cortez tried to do that, the ball went in the bottom of the deck. Went in the back of the lower deck, and you had a 3-run homer. That's taking advantage of the situation, and Houston did that throughout. So I felt that they were not carrying a real team, a real threat of a championship team into the postseason. And frankly, I don't think that Benintendi and LeMahieu would have been enough. Now, if you couple those two with 3 or 4 other guys out of the pen, now at least you're closing the gap. But it would have had to taken all that. And nobody gets to add every player back that they lost during the season. I mean, no one gets to do that in the postseason. Which players on this Yankee team have to be here next year? Now, there are some players that I can tell you right now are automatically here next year. We can tick them off. But if you're asking me which player in my mind has to be here 100%, like if you had said to me in 1997, when the Yankees, coming off a championship, lost to the Indians, a heartbreaking defeat that really rocked the Yankees that year. If you had said to me what Yankees need to be here, I would have given you a long list on that team that would have included regulars led by Jeter and Bernie and Paul O'Neill and Mariano Rivera, of course, and starting pitchers that I can tick off. On this team, when I look at this roster, now a lot of people will say Judge, considering he's 31 next year, and how much money he is going to command, I don't think he being back is completely automatic. Are they going to feel his loss? Absolutely. The guy had an incredible season this year. But Judge aside, and we know a guy like Cole is going nowhere, there are very, very, underline, very few guys who have to be here. And that's a damning statement about this team. Very, very few. Chris emails a long time ago. He said the Yankees didn't need Stanton. I don't know. He said the Yankees didn't need Stanton. I said I didn't want Stanton. I didn't want a power hitter wrapped up in a $325 million. A power hitter who locked up your DH spot, who was injury prone, and who was going to command a $325 million contract. I did not want that player on the team. I know they didn't give up a lot for him, but he still impacted the team dramatically in terms of what could be afforded elsewhere, salary-wise, and clogging up the DH as much as he did on a team that had a lot of DHs. I thought he was a very bad person to add. I don't think he was the right fit at all at the time. And I think they are a team that is very, very ill-matched. I don't like the lineup. I don't like the balance of the lineup. I don't like the way they play. I don't like a lot of players on the team. I hate the roster. I've said that for the last 2 or 3 years. I don't like this roster, and I still don't. I say they can't win games, and you know what? They spend a ton of money. Of course they can win games. When you have that kind of payroll, and you're the New York Yankees, you're going to win games. But I don't think they have ever got this roster where it needed to be. And I don't like a lot of players on this team. And I would miss very, very few of them. I would miss Rizzo. I would not miss many of these players, I have to admit. If I would have gone back to the team of the 90s, if you asked me what guys I would have missed and I wouldn't want to lose, I guarantee you I would have been well into double digits on that team with performers. On this team, I would not fill one hand. I don't like this roster. I don't like the makeup of this team. I don't like the composition of it at all. I didn't like Cole being brought here. I didn't like Stanton being brought here. I really don't like the team. Never have. Doesn't mean it doesn't have talent. We know it hit 254 home runs. We know the year that Judge had. Not taking that away from him. And we know there's guys who have ability on this club. But it's just a very, very odd team. And I was very much adamant about bringing Rizzo back to this team. A lot of people didn't think it was important. I thought it was very important on a lot of different levels. I thought it was very important for their infield defense, for what he provides from the left side, for his ability to hit home runs, all that stuff. He is a gamer. He's an old-fashioned player. And this team hasn't a clue about what it takes to play winning baseball. Not a clue. And it needs an overall. And I'm not even sure. You hear a lot of stuff about Boone being a puppet. And I can't tell you that. I mean, I know what I hear. But let me say, I saw things this year that were not good signs for Boone. There were Yankees who threw Boone under the bus in the series. And that is something that when you see it, it usually is a very poor sign, especially for a guy who is a quote-unquote player's manager. And that means he's a guy who does not kill his players, is pretty easy going on his players, and also goes out of his way to protect them. Doesn't really go out there publicly and demand things from his players. And I don't think there's been a whole lot of accountability with this squad. I really don't. And I think when you hear stuff like last night, and I understand we're in a different era in baseball. All right? And we're in a different era in all walks of life in terms of how data is utilized, how it is analyzed, how it is linked to performance. I understand that. I understand the new idea of thinking that we have now in terms of how to link management to performance. But when you have a quote-unquote mental helper or, a guy who is supposed to be able to, through psychology, aid their performance. And you hear this guy decided to use one of the worst moments in Yankee history and really the blemish on a group that were a dynasty until that point. And you utilize that batch of games to motivate this team when it is faced with a similar hill to climb. It makes you wonder what has ever happened to the Yankee way of doing things and the Yankee way of thinking. It's almost, when I first heard that, I thought it was a joke. I didn't think it was serious. Then you saw everybody parodying it throughout the game last night. I mean, it's laughable. You're the New York Yankees. Act like it. The problem is they don't anymore. They don't have any swagger anymore. They don't act like the Yankees anymore. Those teams in the 90s, once they learned how to win, which they did in the middle of the Braves series, and that's what they got from Joe Torre. They learned how to win in the middle of that series. They took the Braves' best shot. And they turned it around. And remember, they got destroyed in games 1 and 2, and they were down big in Atlanta. And never blinked. And then in game 5, they were in one of the great pitching duels in World Series history between Smoltz and Pettitte. And they gutted the game out. And then beat a generational pitcher, one of the great pitchers ever in Game 6, to come from behind against, and they were overwhelming underdogs. As a matter of fact, the Yankees hadn't been an underdog of that magnitude again until this series. They were 2-1 underdogs to the Braves in that series. They were 2-1 underdogs to the Astros in this series. And that series, when they got bombed the first 2 games, and I'm sure that Yankee team, which had its heart broken in 95, after leading the Mariners 2-0, I'm sure that team had its doubt, and that's where Torre became Joe. He became St. Joe. Torre, who had never had success as a manager, he understood what was needed to lead that group through that situation and to instill in them not to panic, that they could do this. And they did, and then they came out the other side. And remember, they had a bad loss in 97. But then they turned around and just rolled off. Starting in Game 3 of that 96 series, they rolled off 14 straight World Series wins. That's what dynasties do. And I was at all of those games. And we would be in the 5th inning. And I'd be there, and we would be there with Dog, and, we'd be going back and forth and breaking chops and everything. And the Yankees, a lot of those games would be losing. And you never blinked, and neither did the team. They didn't worry about it. They didn't worry if they started, didn't have it, and they got a couple of runs behind, because they knew the pen was going to hold their opponent, and they were going to chip away, and they were going to find a way, and they did. Time after time after time, they knew they were going to win. They've lost that. They've lost that swagger, that confidence, that real belief in that, hey, we're Yankees. We understand how to win. Winning is our brand. Yankees think a lot about selling your stuff now. But winning is no longer their brand. And that's the problem. And that has to be changed. Otherwise, the losses in the postseason are just going to continue as they have year after year after year. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Mike Francesa podcast on the Bet Rivers Network.